A simple woman was mocked in math class, then solved the impossible problem in 17 seconds. Emily had never been the center of attention. She was quiet, kept to herself, and found comfort in the simple things in life. In a small town, life was predictable, and everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. Emily was known for her love of books and numbers, not for being the smartest or the most outgoing. She wasn't the type to make friends easily, but she didn't mind. Her friends were numbers, equations, and the world of logic that made sense to her, even when everything else felt chaotic. One afternoon, Emily found herself sitting in the back row of her math class. The classroom was small, filled with desks arranged in neat rows, and the air smelled faintly of chalk and old books. Mr. Harris, the teacher, was getting ready to introduce a new problem on the board. Emily glanced around the room, feeling the familiar sense of dread that came with every math class. She wasn't bad at math, but it never came as naturally to her as it did to some of her classmates. The numbers often seemed to blur together, and the solutions were hard to reach, like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. Emily tried to focus on the lesson, pushing the negative thoughts aside. But her concentration was broken by the sound of laughter. She turned her head to see David, one of the more popular guys in the class, smirking at her. David was known for his sharp wit and his ability to make anyone laugh, often at someone else's expense. He was the type of student who got things easily, the kind who could finish the hardest problems with barely a second thought. Emily always felt a little inferior next to him. David leaned over to his friend, Matt, and whispered something that made them both chuckle. Then, as if on cue, he raised his voice just loud enough for Emily to hear, "I bet even Emily can't solve this one." He said it in a mocking tone, his words dripping with sarcasm. A few students around them giggled. Emily's face turned red. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that David had said it out loud, or the fact that she knew, deep down, that he might be right. She had never been good at math, and she had struggled through the years to keep up with the lessons. But to be the subject of ridicule in front of the entire class, especially in front of David, was something she wasn't prepared for. Trying to keep her composure, Emily lowered her gaze to the desk in front of her. She didn't want to show any emotion, didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her upset. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, and she could hear the whispering and giggling around her. The laughter seemed to echo in her ears, drowning out everything else. Emily tried to focus on the board as Mr. Harris began writing the new problem. But the numbers and symbols seemed to dance on the page, making no sense to her. She tried to breathe deeply, to calm her racing thoughts, but the doubt had already crept in. She glanced at David, who was still whispering with his friend, Matt. Their laughter was contagious, and a few other students joined in, laughing quietly at something Emily didn't understand. She felt herself shrink further into her seat, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. How could she possibly solve the problem now? How could she even concentrate with all this attention on her? But then, something inside her clicked. She wasn't going to let David or anyone else see her crumble. She didn't need to prove anything to them. She didn't need to be the best in the class. All she needed was to get through this, to prove to herself that she was capable, that she could solve this problem just like anyone else. Emily straightened her back and forced herself to look at the board, to focus on the numbers in front of her. Mr. Harris began explaining the problem, but Emily barely heard his words. Instead, she tried to break down the equation in her mind, focusing on the individual parts that seemed familiar. The more she looked at the problem, the more she started to see patterns, connections she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. The pieces of the puzzle slowly began to fit together in her mind, even as the noise and laughter around her continued. She wasn't going to let herself be distracted. She could do this. As the rest of the class struggled with the equation, Emily pushed forward. She felt a spark of hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a small flicker, but it was enough to keep her going. She didn't need to be the best, she just needed to prove to herself that she wasn't as bad at math as everyone thought. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual as the minutes passed. Emily's hand itched to pick up her pencil and start working, but she resisted. She didn't want to rush, she wanted to be sure, to get it right. She glanced around the room again. Some of the students were scribbling away, others were staring off into space. David had already finished most of the problem, and Matt was copying his answers. Emily knew it wasn't going to be easy. The problem was complex, with multiple steps, each one leading to the next. But she had been here before, struggling with challenges that seemed insurmountable at first. She had always found a way to push through, even when others doubted her. And this time, she wasn't going to let the doubt from her classmates get to her. But as Emily sat there, focused and determined, David's voice broke through the silence again. "Come on, Emily," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Give it up. You're not going to solve it. You never do." The words stung more than she expected. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her head down, her eyes focused on the problem. She wouldn't let David see how much his words hurt. Instead, she pushed them aside, telling herself that this was her chance to prove everyone wrong. Not to them, she wasn't doing this for anyone else but for herself. She would solve the problem, no matter what. The laughter continued for a while longer, but Emily didn't hear it anymore. She was in her own world now, a world where numbers made sense and equations could be solved. It was a world where she was in control, where no one could mock her, and where she had the power to rise above the doubt. As the last few minutes of the class ticked away, Emily's mind worked furiously, piecing together the solution in her mind. She could do this. She would show them that she was more than just the quiet girl in the back row. She would show herself, and everyone else, that she was capable. She had to believe that. Because if she didn't, she knew she'd never make it through the challenge ahead. The bell rang, signaling the end of the lesson. Emily stood up, feeling a sense of resolve that she hadn't felt before. She didn't know if she could solve the problem, but she wasn't going to let anyone see her fail. Not today. Today, she was going to prove something important, something just for her. This expanded version is designed to build tension and set the stage for Emily's triumph, keeping the audience engaged through her internal conflict and growing determination. Would you like to continue with part 2 or add further details? The minutes stretched on as Emily sat quietly in her seat, the noise of the classroom fading into the background. She could hear the soft scratching of pencils on paper, the rustling of notebooks, and the occasional sigh of frustration. The math problem on the board seemed to mock her, its complexity threatening to overwhelm her. Emily could feel her heart beating faster with every passing second. The other students, including David, were already halfway through the equation, their confident expressions contrasting sharply with the uncertainty she felt inside. She glanced at David again, his face a mixture of smugness and amusement. He was scribbling quickly, his pencil moving with ease, as though the answer was already in his mind. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. David had always been the top student in the class, the one who could solve any problem in a matter of seconds. He was the kind of student who breezed through everything, making it look effortless. And here she was, struggling just to make sense of the first few steps. David's voice broke through her thoughts. "Come on, Emily, what's taking you so long?" His words were light-hearted, but the sting was unmistakable. The room fell silent for a moment, and Emily felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her. It wasn't just David anymore, it was everyone. Everyone who had ever doubted her, everyone who had ever underestimated her. It felt like all of their expectations were placed on her shoulders, and the pressure was almost too much to bear. But Emily wasn't the kind of person to break easily. She had been underestimated her entire life. She had grown up in a family where everyone else seemed to have a natural talent for things: her older brother, who was a whiz at sports, her sister, who excelled in every subject at school. And then there was Emily, who often found herself struggling just to keep up. But that didn't mean she was any less capable. She knew she had potential. It just took her longer to figure things out. And today, she was determined to prove it. As the minutes passed, Emily's doubts began to grow. She kept glancing at the board, her mind racing to find a way through the problem. But the more she tried to focus, the more her mind seemed to wander. The numbers blurred together, and the symbols on the board started to make less and less sense. She felt a tightening in her chest, a familiar feeling of frustration and helplessness that had often plagued her in the past. It was as though the harder she tried, the further the solution slipped away. David's voice interrupted her thoughts again, this time louder and more mocking. "What, are you still trying to figure it out? You should just give up, Emily. You're never going to get it. Just leave the hard stuff to the rest of us." Emily felt a rush of heat flood her face. It was one thing to struggle with a difficult math problem. But it was another thing entirely to be openly mocked for it in front of the entire class. She tried to ignore David's words, tried to block out the laughter and the whispers. But it wasn't easy. The room felt like it was closing in on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching her fail. She forced herself to focus, to push past the distractions. The numbers on the board seemed to shift before her eyes, and for a moment, she felt completely lost. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She had to think. She had to figure this out. She couldn't let David and the others see her fail. Not again. She couldn't let this be another moment where she was the one who couldn't keep up, the one who was always left behind. With a deep breath, Emily picked up her pencil. She began to write down the first few steps of the problem, trying to force herself to focus on the numbers in front of her. She wasn't going to let herself be distracted anymore. She wasn't going to let David's words get to her. This was her chance. Her chance to prove that she wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of the class. She was smarter than they gave her credit for. She could do this. But even as she wrote, the doubts kept creeping in. What if she couldn't solve it? What if everyone was right, and she wasn't cut out for this? She remembered all the times she had struggled in the past, all the times she had fallen behind. It was so easy to give in to the doubt, to let it take over and convince her that she wasn't good enough. But Emily refused to give up. Not today. Not after everything she had been through. She looked up at the clock. There were only 10 minutes left. The pressure was mounting, and the room felt hotter by the second. Her classmates were still working, some of them making progress, others getting frustrated and crumpling up their papers. Emily could hear the sound of pencils scraping against paper, the occasional sigh, and the rustling of books as students flipped through their notes. It was as if the entire class was holding its breath, waiting to see who would crack first. But Emily wasn't going to crack. She couldn't. She had spent too long working toward this moment. She had spent too long battling the feeling that she wasn't good enough, that she would always be the last to catch on. She had fought through every doubt, every moment of weakness, and she was not about to let this one problem defeat her. She glanced at David again. He was looking at her, his smirk still in place, but there was something different in his eyes now. He was watching her, waiting for her to fail. And that only made her more determined to succeed. Emily knew that this wasn't just about solving the math problem. It was about proving to herself that she was capable. It was about showing David, and everyone else, that she wasn't the person they thought she was. With renewed determination, Emily turned her attention back to the board. The numbers seemed clearer now, the steps more logical. She could see the solution beginning to take shape in her mind, the pieces falling into place one by one. The more she worked, the more the doubt faded. She wasn't sure how she was doing it, but something inside her told her she was on the right track. She could feel it this time, she wasn't going to fail. David's voice interrupted her thoughts again, this time more forcefully. Are you seriously still at it, Emily? It's a waste of time. But Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. Her focus was completely absorbed in the problem now, and nothing else mattered. She was close. She could feel it. She just had to keep going. Her pencil moved across the paper, each stroke bringing her closer to the solution. Her breathing was steady now, her confidence growing with each step. She was no longer just trying to finish the problem. She was solving it, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The clock ticked down. Emily was almost there. You said, Part 3, KO expand crow without heading 1300 words. My in simple. The room was thick with tension. The clock on the wall ticked away the precious seconds, and Emily felt the pressure building with every passing moment. Her classmates were still scribbling away at their papers, some frustrated, others confident, but Emily barely noticed them. All that mattered now was the problem in front of her. The complicated equation that had seemed so impossible just moments ago now felt like something she could almost reach out and touch. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she wrote the next step, but she forced herself to stay steady. The equation wasn't just a jumble of numbers and symbols anymore. It was a puzzle she had started to understand, a puzzle that was slowly coming together. She had spent years struggling with math, feeling as if the answers were always just out of reach. But now, the pieces were fitting into place one by one. She glanced up at the board again, taking a deep breath. Her mind raced as she mentally double-checked the calculations. The problem had seemed like an insurmountable mountain at first, but now, it felt more like a small hill. She was so close to finishing, so close to solving it, that the excitement inside her was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just about finishing the assignment, it was about proving to herself and to everyone else that she was capable. Emily's pencil moved quickly across the page, the numbers and variables falling into place with surprising ease. The more she worked, the more confident she became. She didn't need to rush, she knew that now. She was no longer afraid of the problem, no longer afraid of the class or the mockery. She was in control, and the solution was within her grasp. But even as she focused on the problem, she could feel the eyes of her classmates on her. Every now and then, she heard a quiet chuckle or the sound of someone's pencil tapping impatiently on the desk. David's voice echoed in her head again, his mocking words still fresh in her mind. "You're never going to get it," he had said. "Just leave it to the rest of us." Those words stung, but they didn't stop her. They only fueled her determination. She wasn't going to let him or anyone else define what she could do. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. She had spent too long doubting herself, too long hiding in the shadows of her classmates' success. Now, she was stepping out into the light, showing the world what she was capable of. As she worked through the problem, Emily's focus deepened. The world outside the classroom faded away, and all that existed was the equation. The numbers on the page became clearer, the steps of the solution more logical. She could see the path ahead, and it was no longer obscured by the fog of doubt. With each new step, she grew more confident in her abilities. She was solving the problem, and nothing could stop her. The students around her were still working, but Emily could tell that most of them were nowhere near finishing. Some were flipping through their textbooks, searching for answers. Others were staring blankly at the board, as if the numbers had become too complicated to understand. Emily couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. For once, she wasn't the one struggling to keep up. For once, she was ahead. She turned her attention back to the problem, her mind working quickly now. There was still a long way to go before she could write the final answer, but it was within reach. The pieces were falling into place one by one, and Emily could almost hear the sound of the puzzle snapping together in her mind. But as she moved to the next part of the equation, her pencil hesitated for just a moment. There was one step she wasn't sure about, one calculation that didn't quite add up. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out where she had gone wrong. For a brief second, panic gripped her heart. Had she made a mistake? Had she miscalculated somewhere along the way? Emily forced herself to take a deep breath, pushing the panic aside. She wasn't going to let one mistake derail her. She had come too far. She had already proven that she could solve this, that she was capable. She just needed to trust herself. The answer was still there, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for her to find it. Her pencil moved across the paper again, and this time, the numbers clicked into place. The solution was there, clear and simple. The steps lined up perfectly, and the equation finally made sense. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She had done it. She had solved the impossible problem. Her heart raced as she looked up at the clock. There were only a few minutes left, and she knew that the others were still struggling. But it didn't matter anymore. Emily had finished. She had solved the problem that no one thought could be solved. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of pride in herself. But even as the excitement of her victory washed over her, Emily couldn't help but glance over at David. He was still scribbling away, his face a picture of concentration. But as he looked up and saw her writing the final answer, his expression changed. The smug look on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. It was brief, but it was enough. Emily had done what he had thought was impossible. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the soft scratching of pencils on paper. Emily sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. She had solved it. She had done what no one else could do, and it felt incredible. But there was one more thing she had to do before she could fully believe it. She had to prove to herself that she was capable, that she was more than just the quiet girl who sat in the back of the class. She had to prove that she was worthy of the respect she had always wanted. She raised her hand. The class fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. Mr. Harris, who had been walking around the room, stopped in his tracks and looked at her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let the nerves take over. This was it. This was her moment. "I've finished," Emily said, her voice steady, though it trembled slightly from the excitement. Mr. Harris looked at her, then down at the paper in her hand. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You've finished?" he asked. "Already?" Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then, slowly, Mr. Harris walked toward her desk, his footsteps heavy on the floor. He took the paper from her hand and studied it carefully, his face unreadable. The room was still, and Emily could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, waiting for Mr. Harris to speak. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "This is correct," he said, his voice soft but filled with admiration. "I've never seen anyone solve this so quickly. Well done, Emily." The words hit her like a wave, and for the first time in her life, Emily felt something she had never felt before: pride. Not just pride in solving the problem, but pride in herself. She had done it. She had proven to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable. And nothing, not even the mockery, could take that away from her. The class erupted into murmurs of surprise, and even David looked stunned. But Emily didn't need their. Emily felt the eyes of her classmates on her, the weight of their gaze heavy in the air. She had just finished the impossible problem, the one that no one else seemed to understand, and she felt a rush of relief mixed with disbelief. Her hand, still holding the pencil, trembled slightly. She looked down at her paper, seeing the clean, neat calculations she had written. It was done. It was solved. She had done it. But the feeling of victory was short-lived. The silence in the room was suffocating. No one spoke, no one moved. Emily dared not look up. She was afraid of what she might see. The last thing she wanted was for her classmates to mock her or dismiss her achievement. For so long, she had been the quiet one, the one who struggled to keep up with everyone else. And now, she had just done something none of them thought possible. Was it enough to make them respect her? Would they even acknowledge her effort, or would they just move on as if it were nothing? A few seconds passed, and Emily could hear the faint sound of pencils scratching on paper. The rest of the class was still working, some of them furiously flipping through their notes, trying to make sense of the problem. She was finished. She had solved it. And yet, there was still that nagging feeling in her chest that told her it wasn't enough. David's voice cut through the silence, and Emily's stomach twisted. "You're done?" he asked, his tone dripping with disbelief. She could hear the smirk in his voice, the same one he had worn earlier when he had mocked her. "You solved it in, what, 5 minutes?" He chuckled to himself, as though the idea of her solving the problem was laughable. Emily wanted to ignore him, to keep her focus on Mr. Harris, who was now walking around the room, checking on the students. But it was hard. His words stung, as they always did. They made her feel small, insignificant. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet all it took was one comment from him to make her feel like she was nothing again. Mr. Harris had stopped near her desk, reading over her paper. Emily could feel his presence next to her, and it made her nervous. Was her solution correct? Would he see the same thing she saw, or would he point out a mistake that she had missed? She had double-checked everything, made sure the calculations were precise, but the doubt lingered. She swallowed hard and lifted her eyes just enough to see Mr. Harris's face. He was looking at the paper with a serious expression, his eyebrows furrowed. The moment stretched on, and the tension in the room seemed to build. Emily's heart raced as she wondered what would happen next. Was this going to be the moment where everything fell apart? Or would he confirm her success? Finally, Mr. Harris looked up, meeting her gaze. The moment felt like an eternity. And then, slowly, a smile began to form on his face. "Well done, Emily," he said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "This is the correct answer." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, she couldn't process them. Had he really said that? Had she really done it? She had solved the problem, the one that had stumped everyone else, the one that had been called impossible. And now, Mr. Harris was acknowledging her success. His approval, the respect in his eyes, felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. Her classmates, who had been listening quietly, exchanged glances. Some were still in disbelief, others looked at her with surprise. Emily could feel their eyes on her now, but this time, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt different. It felt, almost respectful. David, who had been smirking just moments ago, looked as though he had been slapped. His mouth hung open for a moment, and he blinked a few times, clearly caught off guard. "You really solved it," he muttered, his tone a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. Emily didn't answer him right away. Instead, she turned her attention back to Mr. Harris, who was still standing beside her desk, studying the solution she had written on the board. She could see the pride in his eyes now, and it gave her a sense of warmth she hadn't expected. This was what she had been waiting for, the recognition that she wasn't the student everyone thought she was. She wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of the class. She was more than that. "Yes," Emily finally said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions she felt inside. "I solved it." Mr. Harris gave her a nod of approval. "That's impressive. This problem is no easy feat, and you've done it in record time." He turned to the class. "Take note, everyone. Emily has just solved the problem that many of you are still struggling with. It's a reminder that we should never underestimate someone based on appearances or assumptions. Intelligence isn't always about being the loudest or the fastest, it's about perseverance and the ability to see things differently." Emily could feel the eyes of the class on her now, their expressions shifting from surprise to admiration. Some of the students who had been laughing earlier were now looking at her with newfound respect. Even David, who had been so quick to mock her, was silent for once, his usual smug expression replaced by one of disbelief. As the class continued, Emily sat there, still trying to process what had just happened. She had done it. She had solved the impossible problem, and no one could take that away from her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had earned something. This wasn't just about math or solving problems. It was about proving to herself and to everyone else that she was capable. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long wondering if she was good enough. And now, in this moment, she had proven that she was. When the bell rang to signal the end of class, Emily stood up, gathering her things. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, but this time, it didn't make her uncomfortable. It felt empowering. She had done something that no one had expected, and she knew that they would never forget it. David, who had been the source of so much of her doubt, walked up to her as she gathered her books. I didn't think you could do it," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But you did." "I was wrong." Emily looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. "It's okay," she said softly, offering him a small smile. "I'm just glad I could prove to myself that I could do it." David nodded, his usual arrogance gone for the moment. "Yeah, you definitely proved that." As Emily left the classroom, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that she had never experienced before. It wasn't about the math problem, it was about believing in herself, even when no one else did. It was about showing the world that she was capable of more than they had ever given her credit for. And in that moment, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more she was capable of. And this was only the first step. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but Emily barely heard it. The room was still, with everyone still processing what had just happened. Emily had done the unthinkable, she had solved the math problem that no one else could. As she packed her books, the weight of the moment settled in. She had just changed something in herself, something that no one could take away. As the students started to file out of the room, Emily gathered her things slowly, trying to let the excitement of the moment sink in. She had always struggled with math, had always felt like she was just a little bit behind everyone else, but now, she had proven that she was more than capable. She had done what they all thought was impossible. And it wasn't just about solving a math problem, it was about overcoming her own self-doubt, about proving to herself that she had the power to rise above whatever obstacles were in her way. David, who had once mocked her so openly, was now standing quietly by his desk. Emily glanced over at him. He was staring at his paper, his expression unreadable. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she didn't feel angry or upset anymore. In fact, part of her felt a little sorry for him. He had always been the one to talk the loudest, to make fun of others in order to make himself feel superior. But now, after what had happened, it seemed like that smug confidence of his had been shaken. He had never expected Emily to solve the problem, and yet, here she was, quietly proving everyone wrong. The class slowly emptied, and Mr. Harris remained at the front, watching the students leave. When Emily approached him to hand in her paper, he smiled warmly at her. "You should be proud of yourself, Emily," he said softly. That was impressive work. I knew you had it in you, but you really showed what you're capable of today. Emily smiled, but she didn't say anything right away. She had always liked Mr. Harris. He was kind, patient, and he never judged her for being quiet or struggling in his class. He believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. It felt good to hear him say that, to know that he recognized her effort. "Thank you, Mr. Harris," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It means a lot." As she walked out of the classroom, she felt lighter than she had in years. The doubt that had been hanging over her for so long had started to fade. The weight of the mockery and the teasing she had endured over the years no longer seemed as heavy. She had just proven to herself that she was capable, and that was all that mattered. Walking through the hallways, Emily noticed the way people were looking at her. It wasn't the usual glances of indifference or even mockery. There was something different in the way they were staring. There was respect. She could feel it in the way they moved out of her way, in the way they nodded or smiled at her as she passed by. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had stepped into the light, and for the first time in a long time, it felt good to be seen. David walked by her as she headed to her next class. He didn't speak right away, and Emily wasn't sure if she wanted him to. But then he stopped, turning to face her. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to say something. "You were right," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You really solved it?" I didn't think you could, but I was wrong." Emily wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him off, to let him know just how hurtful his words had been. But another part of her understood. David had always been the one to mock others to make himself feel better. She had been the target today, but tomorrow, it could be someone else. Maybe today, he had learned something important. "You don't have to apologize," Emily said quietly, meeting his gaze. "You were just doing what everyone else does. It's okay." David looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. But instead of continuing the conversation, he simply nodded, then turned and walked away. As Emily walked into her next class, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was pride, of course. She had done something no one thought she could do, and that felt amazing. But there was also a sense of clarity, like a veil had been lifted from her eyes. She had always tried to fit into a mold that didn't suit her. She had always tried to meet other people's expectations, even when they didn't match her own. But now, she realized that none of that mattered. What mattered was that she believed in herself, that she knew she was capable of more than anyone had given her credit for. And it wasn't just about math. It was about everything in life. It was about standing up for herself, about pushing through the doubt, and about proving that she was more than the quiet girl who sat at the back of the class. She was strong, she was smart, and she was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. Over the next few days, something else changed. People started talking to her differently. Her classmates who had once ignored her, or even laughed at her, now asked her for help with their own work. They respected her, and more importantly, they seemed to genuinely appreciate her. It was strange, but it was also kind of wonderful. Emily had never felt so seen, so valued. And yet, as she walked through the hallways, receiving nods and smiles from her classmates, she realized something important. She didn't need anyone else's validation to feel proud of what she had accomplished. The respect she had earned from others was nice, but it wasn't the most important thing. What mattered most was that she respected herself, that she knew her worth, and that she had finally proven that to herself. By the time the semester came to a close, Emily had not only solved the impossible math problem, but she had also solved a problem inside herself. She had learned that success wasn't about how others saw her, it was about how she saw herself. She had spent so many years believing that she was less than everyone else, that she would never be as good as them. but now, she knew the truth. She was just as capable, just as worthy, and just as smart as anyone else. As Emily walked out of school on the last day of the semester, she felt something she had never felt before: confidence. She knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The world was hers for the taking, and she was going to make sure she took full advantage of every opportunity that came her way. She had proven herself, not to anyone else, but to herself. And that, she realized, was the most important.